There's a reason the new Dr. Stone OP is already my favorite. While it's not nearly as flashy as the other two, this opening does a much better job of presenting some of the story's central themes. At first it just looks like your typical anime opening. Lots of cool looking cuts that give viewers a preview of what's to come. But after a closer look, there's a lot of subtle details that, when viewed together, reflect the narrative of Stone Wars. That's why, in this discussion, I'm gonna analyze the new Dr. Stone OP and walk through all the cool details you probably missed. And, since I'll be covering all those details, this video will contain spoilers for Season 2. Before I get started, make sure to comment with your thoughts on the new OP. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week in the next video. This week's comment comes from Marcos and his thoughts on Vivi and Shirahoshi. If you'd like more discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe and follow along with each week's video. With that out of the way, let's start by looking at the name for this opening. The actual name for this opening is Rakuen. In English, this roughly translates to paradise, at least according to our friend Mr. Google. Now, this title should stand out since paradise is something that's mentioned a lot throughout the story. The earliest example comes from Tsukasa. Back when he gives his speech on the beach, which just so happens to be a fun little rhyme, he tells Senku that the stone world is a paradise. And you know the rest after that. Blah 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 vested interests, blah 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 noble savages, all that jazz. Later on, Hyoga makes a similar speech when he explains to Senku how he wants to cull the population. So before we even watch the opening, we know it's going to tie into this idea of paradise. But before we get started, there's 3 things I want to highlight that are super important to the opening. First, the lighting. Of course, the lighting is as beautiful as ever, what with all those sexy photons, but the use of lighting is very deliberate throughout the opening. Second, the actual sequence. In other words, it's important to pay close attention to how the shots are organized from beginning to end. Finally, try and see how many fights you can spot in the opening. I'll give you a hint, there aren't any. The season is literally called Stone Wars, yet there isn't a single shot where 2 characters are actually fighting each other. Again, that's lighting, sequence, and lack of fights. Keep those in mind as we move through the discussion. Now, the opening starts with a shot of Senku looking off into the distance. And I hope you were paying attention just now, because here's our first look at a very deliberate use of lighting. Notice that Senku is not facing us, the viewers. Instead, he's facing the sun, which just off this shot alone seems to be a sun rising in the morning. And morning is a big part of Dr. Stone because of the petrification and everyone literally waking up once they're revived. Next, we get a shot of Tsukasa. Unlike Senku, Tsukasa is facing the viewer and has his back to the sun. You could say that the sun is setting in the shot based off the darker colors, but with the context of the next few shots, it seems pretty clear that it's still sunrise. But now let's consider the sequence. We got Senku facing the light, followed by Tsukasa with his back to the light. With this order, the 2 characters are meant to be directly contrasted. And at this point in the story, we know that Senku and Tsukasa have conflicting ideals. Senku wants to bring back science, while Tsukasa has given up on it and wants to prevent its return. With that context in mind, it seems pretty clear that these 2 shots are meant to reflect that conflict of ideals. Senku is facing the sun, the source of light, to show viewers what he's working towards. You can interpret the sun in this case to mean just about anything, but one obvious example is scientific knowledge. The sun is up in space, so it reminds us of space and everything humanity was trying to learn about in the modern world. You can also think of the sun as hope, since, in this case, the sun lights up the darkness of the night and brings with it the dawn of a new day. Then we turn to Tsukasa, who's turned his back to the light. Unlike Senku, Tsukasa has given up on science, which is why he has turned away from the sun. And in a sense, Tsukasa has given up hope. At least, hope that humanity will ever be able to overcome the vested interests that come with modern science. But after those 2 shots, we get this shot here where Senku and Tsukasa cross paths. It reinforces that conflict with Senku facing the light and Tsukasa turned away from it, but notice how they're positioned. You would think, in any sort of conflict, the 2 characters would be directly facing each other before they fight. But here, Senku and Tsukasa are standing side by side with their backs to each other. And that's where this opening starts to omit actual fighting. We know they're at war, but with the way they're positioned, it suggests to viewers that these characters aren't really fighting. Instead, they just have a difference of perspective. Senku facing one way, Tsukasa facing the other way. In that sense, this shot reflects one of the major themes in Stone Wars. Mainly that Tsukasa and Senku were never really fighting, and were always working towards essentially the same goal, just in very different approaches. But we're only 4 seconds into the opening, and I've already said way too much, so let's move on. The next shot is where we see the sun rising, confirming that it is in fact morning time. And we get a glimpse of the Empire of Power, telling us that this is where the story will take place. Then we get the shot of some of Tsukasa's collected soldiers, one of them reaching out in a way that gives off this sense of impending danger. Next, another shot of Tsukasa's pillar men. 2 quick things I want to point out. 1, just like the shot before it, the lighting in the sky tell us it's still early in the morning. 2, this shot is clearly inspired by this panel from chapter 80, right in the middle of Hyoga's speech to Senku. This could be a hint about Hyoga and his true intentions, or it could just be that the animators decided that these guys and gals were just right for the shot. Either way, nice nod to manga readers. Next, a quick shot of Senku opening his eye, which really just serves as a transition to the next cut. In that cut, we get a look at what you might call the fighters for the Kingdom of Science. 3 literal fighters, Gen, who fights with his super sneaky tricks, and Chrome, who fights by helping Senku with his science. Again, 2 things I want to point out. First, the brighter sky tells us that it is now later in the morning. Second, our team is facing towards the Pillar Men, suggesting that this shot is meant to be contrasted with the previous one. Unlike the previous shot, where the Pillar Men are bathed in light but are still petrified, our team is looking right up at the sun. So those themes of science and hope come into play again. While the Pillar Men are asleep because they're in a world separate from science, our team, like Senku, is looking towards the light, reflecting their new fascination with science and everything it has to offer. Next, we get a shot of Ruri, Suika, Kaseki, and Magma with the tank. Admittedly, this scene is a bit boring, but it does a nice job of reinforcing the previous contrast. Notice how all the Pillar Men basically look the same. They're indistinguishable and blend together as one massive force. But in this shot, we get a balance of 4 very different characters. We get Ruri, the quiet priestess, in the front, Magma, the overly aggressive fighter, in the back, then young Suika and old Kaseki in the middle. So, unlike the Pillar Men, the Kingdom of Science doesn't need to rely on the threat of numbers. Instead, their unique personalities and skills come together to form an even stronger force, represented by the tank. Notice, all those soldiers and still no real fights. Again, reinforces the idea that this is only a difference of perspectives. Next, we get the iconic knuckle-to-knuckle-to-knuckle scene from the first episode, then the Earth, then Hyoga taking off his mask. And I should point out that all 3 shots appear in the manga. The Earth shot is from Hyoga's speech in chapter 80, and the reveal we see is directly taken from the scene where Hyoga betrays Tsukasa. So we get a promise to save the Earth, a shot of the Earth, and then Hyoga who wants to cull the Earth. In that sequence, not only does this show viewers the Hyoga reveal, which by the way I'm not a super big fan of, but whatever, but it also places Senku and his team against Hyoga in a race to achieve what they think is best for the planet. Which is highlighted by the fact that when we cut to Hyoga, the singer says Rakuen, tying us back to that idea of paradise reflected in the title. Following that, we get a shot of the steam engine, then the dynamite, then Mirai, and yes, I'm very aware that that debunks my little theory from before. Let's just move on. We get this quick scene of Senku crushing stone, reminding us that he's working towards conquering the stone world and bringing everyone back. Next, we see Kohaku and the brothers showing off their new weapons, and Senku showing off the new tank. 2 quick things. First, the brighter sky lets us know that morning is over and now it's daytime, giving us the feeling that time has passed as we've moved along. Second, all these flashy toys and still no fights, reflecting yet again that the Kingdom of Science isn't trying to actually fight the Empire of Power. Next, a quick shot of Tsukasa, then the cell phone team running to avoid Homura, with the sonic bombs giving off the impression of an exploding battlefield. I should also point out that the team is running towards the sun, which we soon learn why with the shot of Taiju and Yuzuriha and the soon-to-be cell phone site. Again, working towards science and hope and all that good stuff. Then we get a shot of Tsukasa and Hyoga showing off their personal power as well as the power of their massive army. Now, everything going forward is perfect. I mean absolutely beautiful. We get a shot of Gen singing, which we know is the plan to trick everyone with false hope. And that trick is masterfully reflected by the fact that Gen has his back to the sun, reminding us that, while beautiful, what Gen is doing is very underhanded. It's very sneaky, and so he has to do it in the shadows where nobody can see him. It's also just really cool how he sings along with the words. But the scene fades away and we get a sequence of flashbacks for the new characters. First, we see Nikki jamming out like I am to this amazing OP. She's all alone in the underpass except for some posters of Lillian, reflecting her loneliness and her deep connection to Lillian's music. Next, a quick shot of the wholesomest of boys, Ukyo, doing what he does best. Then Yo, which is a nice shot for a couple of reasons. First, the way he's presented. Rather than present what would clearly be police work, we see Yo leaning back in a chair, his feet on the table, with a smug grin on his face, reflecting his preference for being lazy and abusing his position to get what he wants. And there's a cute little Boichi mug, which better be real merch soon or this season is a total bust. Next, we get a beautiful shot of Homura, which I really like for the way it presents her gymnastics. Homura is seen literally suspended in mid-air, and the camera angle gives off the perspective of a spectator looking up as Homura flips through the sky. And before I move on, I just want to point out that there's, you guessed it, 2 characters missing from these flashbacks, Tsukasa and Hyoga, which is a nice hint that those characters are still shrouded in mystery at this point. Following the flashbacks, we get a gorgeous shot of Yuzuriha putting together a statue. The sun lines right up with her as she holds the person's hand in a sort of prayer-like pose, highlighting the fact that this is a gamble and everyone is placing their hopes on Senku's plan. Next, a shot of Lillian singing away like the goddess she is. As she does this, both she and Byakuya look towards the moon. This time, just as the sun is replaced by the moon, the hope in this opening takes on a new form. Just like we saw with the CD, Lillian and Byakuya are passing on their dream to save humanity as Lillian sings, with the hope that they will eventually reach Senku. And what do you know, the next shot brings us back to Senku. We see him make a fist as if he is literally grabbing onto the hopes and dreams that he's inherited. It also suggests that Senku is readying his resolve, making a fist and preparing for whatever comes next. Next, a shot of Senku looking down. This could mean just about anything, but since he's looking down rather than up, I don't think Senku is just thinking about his memories with Byakuya. Instead, it seems like Senku is reflecting on everything that's happened. Like with the previous shot, Senku is mentally preparing himself and strengthening his resolve, which makes sense considering the weight on his shoulders. Senku inherited his father's hopes and now he is trying to save the entire planet. And that resolve is made clear when Senku looks up at the sky. Now the sky is darker, implying that the sun is setting just as the opening comes to its end. And just like it began, this opening ends with Senku looking towards the light. Now, carrying the weight of everyone's hopes and dreams, Senku finally looks back up at the light, showing viewers that Senku is ready to do whatever it takes to save humanity and restore the world to what it once was. And that's it for this analysis. As you can see, this is a great opening packed with all kinds of details and visual references. If you enjoyed the analysis, then make sure to like the video. If you'd like more discussions like this one, then make sure to subscribe for weekly One Piece and Dr. Stone videos. Thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.